Endeavour Energy's predecessor organisations. I'm an electrical engineer by profession and a power engineer in terms of my specialty. I'm also a licensed electrician. Still, there was a time in the past where I was a fully qualified lines person or line worker, as well as cable jointer. So I have both the, if you like, the trade and the engineering background. And I finished up my career in the power industry directly as 10 years as I'm the executive of Endeavour Energy in the last 5 years as their chief engineer. Although in the corporate world, they never give you that title. It's always got funny sort of, general manager, XYZ sort of titles. So in what I diplomatically call the fourth quarter of my working career, I've now come to work with the university as the Director, Energy Futures. One of the things that we're finding in the energy transformation journey across the world, in particular here in Australia, one of the things I say, and you'd appreciate this, this is sometimes very difficult for a career engineer to admit, is our energy transformation journey is as much, in fact, is probably dominantly social transformation more than it is a technical transformation. The reality is all of the tech to get us to net zero is available now. The challenge for us is how do we engage with it as individuals and as communities and as a nation to get us there in a way that is inclusive, that brings everyone along the journey. As one of my mentors in my early part of my career said to me, there's no point getting to the end of a journey driving an empty bus. Even in our case, when it comes to clean energy, if that's an electric bus or a bus that's powered by hydrogen. Boom tish, first dad joke of the morning. So one of the things that we've built at the University of Wollongong, and I'll just do the shameless plug stuff up front and sort of get that out of the way if that's all right. One of the things we've built in the Energy Futures Network is bringing together the academics on the technical side, on the economics and marketing side, and in particular on the social side of the energy transformation. And that's really the foundation of the concept of the Energy Futures Network that we've built. There's around almost 100 now academics from across all faculties of the University of Wollongong. We're focused on everything from the applications of artificial intelligence and how that can be brought to bear in our energy transformation journey. There's companies that have spun out of people from the University of Wollongong who are doing fantastic work in the space of applying AI and leveraging that into intelligent use of the electricity network. Why that's important we'll get to in just a moment. As well as everything from your traditional infrastructure planning right the way through to innovative and early stage research into battery technology. There's a lot of, I think, quite legitimate concerns expressed on our clean energy journey as a globe on lithium as a source as a material source for lithium-ion batteries. We're actually in the process of developing sodium-based batteries. And when I'm down in Wollongong, I'm a bit further when we're up here in the mountains, but I'm down in Wollongong, I can say, why is sodium a great source for batteries? Well, because there's a huge lake of it, just tens of kilometres away. I'm just getting the bearings here in that direction from where we are at the moment. We're also very mindful of this clean energy journey for our nation requiring a huge volume uplift in skills for us as a nation and particularly for our regions. One of the things that really characterises the energy transformation journey for us as a nation is, quite frankly, a move away from the big cities and into regional centres. Depending on which projections you want to believe, because they are just that, but by and large, what we can see is 5 out of every 6 new jobs that will be created in the clean energy industry will actually be in regional areas across Australia. So to build on that, as well as to just increase the number of capable people that we have working on the energy transformation, the University of Wollongong has been successful in obtaining funding from the federal government to establish an Energy Futures Skills Centre. We're in the process of building that at the moment. There'll be 2 main components of it. One of them will be a community engagement centre. That'll be opening less than a year from now, and that'll be based in our science space. If you're familiar with the Innovation Campus down there on Squires Way, the mini Questacon that we have there, that's meant to cater for interest in ages 5 to 85, which hopefully covers the demographic in the room here today, Apologies if it doesn't. So that's meant to really engage people and provide them with facts and information on energy transformation, what's going on and what the future may hold. The second and major component of that Energy Future Skills Centre is going to be enhanced training facilities at the University of Wollongong. New physical equipment, new laboratories, all of them aimed at training more people in the clean energy space, as well as giving people up-to-date equipment and test materials to educate them on the technology that is out there in the grid today, not the technology that used to be there decades ago. So we start with what I call Energy Grids 101. And I'm just mindful of, we need to sort of baseline some of our understanding here. In all of this, I should say as well up front, I'm not here to convince you of anything. It's not the University of Wollongong's job, nor is it mine, to preach to you and tell you how you should think. We do see our role, very importantly, in the communities that we serve as being hopefully a trusted voice, but certainly a voice that sticks to academic rigour, sticks to the facts and conveys information in a way that is accessible to people and allows people to make their own informed decisions. So in order to understand where we are, we do need to go back in time a little bit and have a look at the energy grid as it used to be. The energy grid as it used to be was characterised by having a very small number of very large generators, most of them fuelled by coal and gas, a little bit of hydro thrown in for good measure, but let's be honest, mostly burning coal. And they created or generated the electricity, and it flowed one way, downhill, just like water from a dam through a series of ever-diminishing pipes to get to all of our homes, unidirectional flow, and very importantly, no storage. So that's the energy grid of the past. One-way power flow, big grid, centralised. You could count on your fingers and maybe take off one shoe, and you'd be able to count and name all of the major generators in the grid. Today, Australia is leading the world in the uptake of distributed solar and distributed energy. 1/3 of homes, on average, have solar on their roofs. Significant penetration in the business and industrial areas is happening as well. So what we have is an energy system where power is no longer flowing one way, it's flowing every which way, depending on whether the sun's shining, who's using energy, whether it's a weekend, whether it's a working weekday. We also have storage becoming a factor more and more in the energy grid. And we have, with renewables, large-scale solar farms, turning a paddock into a solar farm, and onshore and in the future offshore wind-based generation, which is in many cases individually not as large a generation source as the traditional coal-fired power plants, but collectively much greater as a power source on a regional level. So we have these power flows now going every which way. I comment, and please, I don't mean to have this as, blowing your own trumpet or whatever, but as a career power engineer who knows how the grid was designed and how it was built and how old a lot of it is, quite frankly, it is a testament to the resilient engineering that my forebears put into that energy grid, that it is still delivering the reliability that it is, and that it is still delivering the outcomes that it is for all of us as customers, given how far outside its original design parameters it is operating every single day of the week. Now, one of the things, and please don't even try and read this, okay? This confuses me, okay? This is an explanation. Yeah, stop reading, James. This is a bit of a snapshot, a one-off diagram. Just check, yeah, there it is there, of that in some ways gives lie to the thinking behind how our energy grids are still centrally thought of, and I actually think is an area that, and this is a personal view, that needs to change and change rapidly. Suffice to say, just take one point away from this slide. When we talk about our energy supply and our energy grids, there are actually two things going on all the time. Two things going on. One of them, the electricity grid, which is ruled by the laws of physics. And the other one, markets, which have been artificially created to overlay the physics of it, and they obey, if you can call them this, the laws of economics. And that's where all the dollars actually flow. And a lot of the time I hear in public discourse, a lot of mooshing together of those two things. And when you start mooshing them together, that's a technical term, by the way, when you start mooshing them together, it gets really, really confusing, and you can almost get any answer that you like. So in a lot of what we talk about here today, I'll sort of keep drawing the line and the separation between physics, how things are happening, and the markets and the economics. And I say this as an engineer. Somebody once said, and I've yet to see evidence to the contrary, that the study of economics was created so that astrology would appear credible. So just to give some size to the numbers and what's going on in the change to our grid. The largest coal-fired power plant, what we've ever had on the grid, is Eraring. It's been in the news and that a lot lately. I've rounded up there, but for sake of argument, 2.9 gigawatts. Large-scale solar farms, around 10 gigawatts, coming into the low teens now as more of them are being connected. Gigawatts being a measure of how much capacity they've got to generate electricity. Here's the kicker. Solar on homes, 23 gigawatts, and we're connecting 3 gigawatts per year of new solar onto our homes here in Australia. We are connecting an Eraring a year onto rooftops here in Australia. That's fact, that's what's going on. 23 is actually out of date. That was the most recent officially published figure, December last year. We're more than halfway through this year, so that number as we stand here today is probably at least 24.5 or 25 gigawatts now, as we say here. So bottom line is we're running the grid backwards, sideways and all sorts of other ways on a daily basis. And what that means is most of the rules and regulations, as I spoke about before, the economics and the rules and the markets that govern the grid are frankly backwards, no longer fit for purpose either. Now, why is solar important and why are we doing this in Australia? People can argue about subsidies and all those sorts of things. But one thing that is a huge factor in all of this is we are blessed with solar resource. If we have a look here, what you can see here is the worst solar resource in Australia, which the last place you'd probably want to have solar panels is the west coast of Tasmania, has a solar access and a solar resource that is better than everywhere in the UK and the equal of most of Germany and Italy in terms of Europe. Just to give you an idea of why solar is such an opportunity and why it's so important for Australia. Similarly, if we have a look at wind, and sorry these are different diagrams drawn from different sources, but if we have a look at wind, the Australian wind resource, while it's not as spectacular, again we go to the other end of the spectrum when we talk about wind resource up in the North Sea and that sort of thing. Oh my gosh, it's a bit windy up there. No wonder they have so much wind generation in that part of the world. But Australia, and particularly up and down the southern parts of Australia here and up the coast where we are here, the wind resource is still very, very good. Very good. So we're a nation that, unlike others, don't have one or the other of solar or wind. We've actually got both. Now, jumping down, so that was a bit of a macro picture. So I'm waving my arms for the cameras there, a bit of a macro picture. We'll just sort of dive down a little bit now into some areas that affect us in our daily lives. And this is all from Rewiring Australia. These are screenshots from them. We're talking now about the impact of rooftop solar and its benefit to us as energy consumers. And James, you might want to cover your ears for this bit for the network providers, but basically what this is saying is on average the grid price that's actually gone up now of electricity is 28 cents. It's actually more in the mid-30s now with the recent price rises. The total average lifetime cost of a kilowatt hour, a unit of energy from your solar system on your home, is around 3-5 cents per kilowatt hour, as opposed to the 10 times that, which is what we pay for it from the grid at the moment, given the use of the grid. Now what that means is, and this gets into some of the discussion here, and I don't want to sound self-contradictory when we get a little bit further on, but what this means is, let's say you had a power plant that was completely magic and it could generate power for free. While ever you have to then wheel that power through the existing energy grid and recover the costs of doing that from the owners and operators of that electricity grid, which is around a third of what we pay per kilowatt hour for our energy, it would still cost, free electricity would cost you 10 cents a kilowatt hour delivered to your home, as opposed to the 3 cents a kilowatt hour that you can get it for by investing in solar panels on your home. Provided, of course, you are able to adjust your lifestyle so that you can maximise your use of that energy during the daylight hours when it's actually being produced. Now, of course, that's all well and good when the sun's shining, but what about when it's not? And that's where storage comes into the picture. As it says in the heading, solar's great, except when the sun's not shining. So storage can take many different forms, and this is where we start to really unpack some of the discussion on what does a clean energy future look like for us as a nation, for us as a region, and for us as individual communities and even individual households. There's all too much debate, much of it politicised, and I'm mindful of Mowena's opening statements, but there's all too much debate that does, I think, unfortunately, try and play into our human desire to just have one solution. Could there just be one box that gets ticked and that fixes our clean energy future? Great, I don't need to worry about that. I've got to worry about getting the kids to soccer and grocery bills and whatever else. The unfortunate news when it comes to clean energy for all of us is there's not a silver bullet solution. There is, however, a silver buckshot solution. That is, we need different energy sources, different types of generation, different scales of generation and storage, each of them playing their part. I hear too many debates if we talk about storage, and I've come to this at this point in the talk deliberately. We hear too many debates around, home batteries are going to solve the world and all we need is big subsidies and tons of investment in home batteries. Guess what? No. Physics don't allow it. Storing all of that energy in the part of the grid that is connected, it is the weakest part of the grid. The skinniest wires of the grid are what connect your home to the wires in the street, and the next skinniest wires are the wires in the street. They don't have the capacity to supply bulk energy to large energy users. But they do have the capacity to supply small amounts of energy to small energy users. So the debate around will home batteries solve everything? Will community batteries or grid side of the meter but close to consumer batteries solve everything? Or do we need big grid batteries and big storage and pumped hydro and all of those sorts of things? People say, which one? Which one's the solution? And the answer, showing my background now at a university, the answer is D, all of the above, in a multiple choice type question. We need each of the technologies in the storage space playing to their strengths, maximising the benefits that they can deliver to us as consumers, dare I say, maximising the benefits they can deliver socially to democratise access to clean energy. One of the biggest unspoken negatives of distributed solar here in Australia, and this is an uncomfortable truth about the energy journey, and it's another reason why our market models are no longer fit for purpose, is that our energy companies who run the grid all operate with what's called a revenue cap. So they're allowed to recover a certain amount of money, and that inoculates them against the volume of energy flow through the network. So if there's a good year or a bad year, it doesn't matter. They get a revenue cap because they're running a fixed asset base. It costs a certain amount to run that. The more and more people who own a roof or have access to a roof put solar on their roof, therefore use less power by drawing it through the grid. Therefore, they pay less for their network charges to the energy provider. That means the network provider, my alma mater, Ausgrid, Endeavour Energy, Essential Energy, Energy Queensland up in Queensland, all of them then put their network prices up so that they meet their revenue cap, which means the people who can't afford solar, renters, low-income earners, pensioners, people in social housing, are now paying proportionately more for their electricity than they would have otherwise. And this is where the inequity of things like home batteries starts to come into it as well, is it locks away clean energy more and more with the haves as opposed to putting storage on the grid more shared, where it can democratise access to locally generated clean energy. So that's one of the uncomfortable truths of the ill-fitting markets that we now have, sending signals of inequity into the energy system as it stands today. And none of that's criticising any of the companies. I should be at pains to point out here. Even the predatory behaviour of the generators that's occurring at the moment. They're only diligently following their obligations under Corporations Act to maximise profits to their shareholders, but they're doing it to a bunch of rules that allow them to do it. It's the rules that are actually the problem. There we go. So a quick explanation, and just to give you a rundown now, we're stepping up. So we've sort of a bit of high level, gone down into the weeds. Now we're coming, where are we for time? Yeah, that's good. We're coming back up now into some sort of macro pictures. This is the national electricity market, the NEM that you might hear people talking about. It's the interconnected energy grid that supplies Queensland, New South Wales, ACT, Victoria, South Australia, and across the Basslink to Tasmania when Basslink's actually operating. So the colours in this actually tell you what's going on. Burning mud, brown coal, is contributing that over the course of that particular day in the middle of winter a year ago. I checked, it hasn't changed, the mix of it hasn't changed this year. Black coal contributing this over the course of a 24-hour period. I might add this is 5 p.m. to 5 p.m, which was just when I took this snapshot out of Open NEM. By the way, this is all publicly accessible to anyone on the internet. It's Open, O-P-E-N, NEM, N-E-M. You can find out what's happening in real time on the energy grid, where the energy's all coming from. What this shows increasingly, contribution from gas. Interestingly, the contribution from hydro and batteries, the slim sort of line, we're seeing more and more this little blue sliver here getting bigger and bigger as more and more of the big grid batteries coming online and being used. There's obviously then wind contributing quite a significant amount, and then the two colours, I don't know whether you can make them out in the distance there, but solar from homes being the lighter yellow, and then large-scale utility solar, the big solar farms being the slightly darker yellow. Now what this is doing is causing, as you can see here, coal and traditional baseload generators have great difficulty winding back, throttling back, and then winding back up again. They were never designed to do that. They were designed to run at a particular level 24/7. So what this means is, in terms of the physics, the grid operation, and in terms of the economics, which we'll get to in a moment, solar is eating everybody's lunch. That's both a factual statement and a dad joke, given the time of the day that it's actually occurring over. So what we hear about is the duck curve, and people talking about the duck curve. So I'll call this the physics duck curve here, and it gets its name because what it's saying is during the middle of the day, all of the distributed solar that people are connecting to their homes here in Australia is meaning the big generators can't operate because there's not enough electricity demand to warrant them operating. You can't over-generate into what always has to be a balanced electricity system of what's being used and what's being generated. It always has to be in an exact balance situation. So what that means is, potentially, in the absence of any other action being taken, we could find ourselves moving into, and we have on occasion dangerously moved into, a position of grid instability, where we don't have enough load on the energy grid to actually soak up all the generation that's out there. Now, there's lots of quite viable solutions to putting enough load onto the energy grid, and most of those solutions are being acted to the credit of the entities involved at the moment. Some of the solutions aren't being enacted because the economics and because the market designs don't allow them or don't incentivise them or position people in the entities in a decision-making authority where they're acting in their interests, not in the interests of the overall grid. I'll decode that, turning storage hot water systems on during the middle of the day. You could do that, and you could lift the bum of the duck, that's a technical term again, everyone, basically by putting all of that load, moving it from the middle of the night, heating off-peak hot waters, banging them on in the middle of the day. It's a no-brainer. Why isn't it happening? It's not happening because off-peak tariffs are set by the large what's called gentailers. Those are the companies that own both generation and retail the energy to you, and they would rather keep that demand in the middle of the night so it can be supplied by their coal and gas-fired generators, whereas if they moved it or allowed it to be moved to the middle of the day, then that's energy they wouldn't be selling because it would be soaked up by solar that's coming from people's homes. So the network grid operators want to turn them on during the middle of the day, but they are not in a position of decision making in that space by and large because of the poor market models that we have at the moment. Now let's have a look at the economics of all of this. So that was a physics side of things. I keep sort of having this imaginary sides of the stage when I talk about this. So we're over in economic land now. What's going on with the dollars? This is the first quarter of this year. These are the energy prices, wholesale energy prices, not what we pay. This is what the retailers that we buy from pay for the energy that they then on-sell to us. These are the averages over the course of a day, midnight to midnight, and the fuzziness of the lines is because it's 3 months worth of dollar points all smooshed into each 5-minute interval as we go along there. So what this is showing us is Victoria has the least volatile pricing profile, going heavily negative, I might add. That is negative, so you're having to pay to get your energy out there into the grid, up to less than $200 per kilowatt hour. Queensland and Victoria, Queensland and New South Wales, I should say, follow roughly the same profile in the wee small hours of the morning, but as soon as everyone gets up, the greater amount of solar resource that exists, I think, is the contribution here in Queensland, means the dip here close to zero. But then once the sun goes down, oh my goodness, aren't the Queensland coal and gas-fired generators excellent at making a profit out of it? And that's what's going on as soon as the sun goes down in terms of this price profile, as well as the blue here in New South Wales. Now within that, there's lots of opportunity, not the least of which is if you own, for example, a big battery. What a terrific economic opportunity if you own a big battery. Fill your boots during the middle of the day, every day, and then make $1 squillion profit of an evening. That's why when you get offers from some of the large gentailers, I don't know whether you're receiving them here in the Highlands. I know I get to look at them, laugh, and through the home shredder with them on a regular basis from the large gentailers down where I am in Wollongong, when they offer you participation in their VPPs and their virtual power plants and these sorts of offers. Look very carefully at them. Some of those offers are very good. Some of them are the equivalent of you buying the cow, you feeding the cow, you paying the vet bills on the cow, and somebody else taking all the milk for free. Because the thing you've got to remember about a VPP is this is what they're doing with it. Your battery that you've bought and paid for every day. They're filling it for free, and then they're charging you and a lot of other people, and then they're able to sell it to you and a lot of other people and to other retailers for $1 squillion as soon as the sun's gone down. So look very carefully at what they're offering when it comes to those VPP offers. Mindful of time, so skipping on now, a topical subject down in the sunny Gong of Wool, where I come from, offshore wind. Now, and where it fits into the energy debate. Excuse me while I just grab myself. Watching a Ricky Gervais YouTube the other day. He has himself a large beer on stage. I think it's a bit too early in the day to be doing that, isn't it? And I couldn't guarantee adherence to the universities or the political neutrality statements that Morwenna was making earlier if I started getting into that sort of thing. So, offshore wind. I'm not here to convince you that it's a good idea. I'm not here to convince you that it's a bad idea, but I will try and give you facts to give you some information on how it fits into the energy transformation picture and why. I think one of the biggest things that's been missed in the entire debate on offshore wind across Australia is an insufficient explanation of why. Why offshore wind, and in particular why the offshore part about it. So, very quickly, first and foremost, one of the things that we need to consider is having electricity available when we need it. Lots of people like to talk about that as base load. Oh, base load. First thing to remember is anyone that talks and says that we need base load isn't paying attention to either the physics or the economics of how the energy grid operates. The graphs that I've shown you previously, the duck curve shows you empirically base load is dead from a physics perspective because solar has wiped it out. And the economics that I just showed you show you that the economics of any baseload generation, regardless of the fuel source that you're using, are very, very challenged now and into the future. Unless, of course, there's a wholesale change to our market structures, in which case, if you're designing new markets to specifically cater to a type or genre of generation, you've got to ask yourself, well, if you haven't specifically designed the market so that it incentivises one thing and another, is it really a market? Or are you just trying to engineer an outcome? So, one of the things we need to consider with any sort of generation is what's called the capacity factor. Without getting too much into this, and you can all be grateful there's not a whiteboard because there's an engineer in front of you here, and you know that'd put everyone to sleep, and James and I would probably be the only ones interested by the end of it here. But suffice to say, the mathematics of capacity factor are, if you have a generator that has a particular output capacity, if it ran at that capacity for 24 hours, it would generate a certain amount of energy. You put that on the bottom of the fraction, and on the top of the fraction, you put what's the actual energy that it does generate on average over a 24-hour period. So a generator that can run flat out 24/7 and has a capacity factor, that's what this is, of 100%. There aren't really any generators that do that. Some get close, but you've always got to take them out for downtime, maintenance, all of those sorts of things. So capacity factors are by and large less than 1. If we have a look at onshore wind, it's not bad, 30 to 35%. So what that means is you put a megawatt of generation in on land, you'll get about a third of a megawatt reliably. That means when you need it, there will be about a third of a megawatt of wind available. Obviously, there'll be periods of time where you get all of it, and there'll be periods of time you get a little bit less than that, but by and large, you can guarantee a third. Offshore wind has a much higher capacity factor, materially higher capacity factor, 45 to 55% in most of the coastal areas in and around the east coast of Australia, and even better than that as you go down towards Bass Strait and you start hitting those roaring 40s that scream through there under the bottom of Australia and across the Bight. So on average, you'd say 50% capacity factor. So you put a megawatt of offshore wind in, you'll get a half a megawatt, rain, hail or shine, 24/7 out of it. But what about coal? It's sort of along the bottom, hidden there. I'm not sure whether you can see it. But what about coal, I hear you all cry? It's baseload. It has a high capacity factor. Bad news. No, it doesn't. The coal-fired fleet in Australia is ageing, and ageing significantly. Its capacity factor is in rapid decline. It's going down by around 2.5% per year on average. At best, I'm actually being generous to it. At the moment, it's actually hovering more around 60%. But we'll call it 65 because we're trying to be kind here. So at best, coal has currently got a 65% capacity factor here in Australia. What that means is we are only a few years away from offshore wind and coal being as reliable in terms of base load as you hear a lot of people talking about. Bit of an uncomfortable truth for some people, but a fact nonetheless. Those aren't numbers that I've made up. Those are numbers that are readily available. They are accessible on platforms such as OpenNEM and through the CSIRO's GenCost report. The actual technology itself, overseas, and this is an issue that's been of material interest to my academic colleagues and I, particularly the marine ecologists. Please, I don't, in any of my representation here, for a moment, want to come across to you as conveying that I'm an expert in marine ecology and marine science or social issues either. I have the privilege of working with many learned people in that space, and as a team we bring together the expertise and the information that I'm presenting here today. So one of the things we see is the bulk of offshore wind that exists in the world at the moment is fixed bottom. It's been placed mainly in the northern hemisphere, and it's been placed in areas where it is quite close to the shore and relatively shallow waters. One of the things that characterises the topography of the seabed on the east coast of Australia is the continental shelf is very, very close in to the shore. And what that means is for us to have a viable offshore wind industry here in Australia, it'll need to be this floating-based technology, which is still anchored to the seabed, obviously, so it doesn't float away entirely, but it moves up and down with the sea. And as a result of that, it also means that once you've crossed the continental shelf and you're faced with the investment required for this sort of technology, well, you may as well stick it far enough out to sea to make sure you're getting the best wind resource and the best capacity factor, hence the ranges of 10 kilometres plus out to sea. And in the Illawarra, with the now declared zone, that actually starts 20 kilometres out to sea. The other thing that's not talked about too much, and bear in mind, you're talking now to a power engineer, so this is the stuff that interests me and probably 0.001% of the population as well. But always remember that for all of that offshore infrastructure, you're going to need quite a lot of onshore infrastructure as well. You're talking about gigawatt scale generation out to sea. That needs to be connected into the grid, and that size of connection into the grid is not readily available. Large on-land substations will in fact be needed to connect offshore wind energy into our grid. That's not a bad thing. It's not a good thing. It's just a thing. And one of the things that I would say at this point in terms of public reaction, we'll get to this in just a moment, to offshore wind energy, and this gets back to my earlier statement about how much I think that and how much my academic colleagues are observing empirically, that the energy transformation journey is a social journey, not just a technological journey. I spent 34 years physically constructing, then planning, designing, project managing and building a rough estimate $3 billion worth of electricity infrastructure. I built, designed, planned a couple of hundred substations and thousands of kilometres of overhead line. I fronted town hall meetings, much more active in their interchange than this one has been so far, with communities who are faced with the prospect of new electricity infrastructure being placed nearby them. And I say this seriously but flippantly as well to make a point. In all of that 3.5 decades, I never heard a single person in any community say, yes, I love overhead power lines, please build them on my land and or where I can see them, and while you're there, put a substation next door so I may gaze upon its magnificence for the next 40 or 50 years. Never heard anyone say that. Why didn't I hear people say that? Well, because they're sane, by and large. All infrastructure projects, whether it's a fast rail line, whether it's a new roadway, a new freeway, whether it's a new multi-storey building, whether it's new electricity infrastructure, new water, new gas, new sewer. All major infrastructure projects, and particularly linear infrastructure projects, have the same characteristic to them. That is, small number of people in a community who basically bear the high volume of affectation and impact, and then a far larger number of people not in that local community who basically reap the vast majority of the benefits. That's a characteristic of all large-scale infrastructure. And that's where I would suggest that we miss the ball sometimes in trying to convince people of the need for the infrastructure to be in place, as opposed to engaging with them as humans to say, hang on, you're being affected by this. What does a net positive outcome better look like for you as a community? Rather than trying to just get into the polarised discussion of for and against, which will inevitably drive division within the community as opposed to cooperation. So, the need for offshore wind, it's multi-gigawatt in scale, it's there to serve the big loads. I got asked by Peter Fitzsimons, why aren't they proposing an offshore wind farm off of Bondi? A very political sort of question that I was asked. The answer is simple. I said, because Bondi doesn't have a bloody steelworks. We do in Wollongong. That's why offshore wind is proposed across Australia, off the coast of Newcastle and off the coast of Wollongong. We need large-scale generation to serve large-scale loads. We needed to have a high enough capacity factor. And last but by no means least, as I was talking about earlier in terms of community sentiment, if we were, for instance, to build much more wind generation inland, think of the number of transmission lines that we would then have to build. Because while we as a nation like to think of ourselves as rough, tough bushies, the reality is we're all a bunch of thin-blooded coasties. That's where most of the electricity demand is, because that's where most of us live. So if you were to have an alternative to offshore wind being onshore wind, then that alternative brings with it the need for hundreds, thousands of kilometres of new overhead transmission line across the land of people who will reap no benefit from that and have no benefit from it, just to supply population centres and the big industry along the coast. Whereas offshore wind is located right by the coast. So those are some facts. I've also got some stuff on hydrogen, and there's a little bit of stuff there on nuclear as well. I might probably skip to that because I'd like to allow a little bit of time. So if we just go through, the slides will be shared so you can read them for all that you want. Just to round out with a little bit of discussion, facts and figures on nuclear. Again, I was interviewed by Peter Fitzsimons on offshore wind, and the bugger ambushed me with a question on nuclear, and I blurted out something that ended up being the headline of the article. So that'll teach me that no matter how much media training they give you, you still slip up from time to time. The line was, and warning, I'll be using some colourful language, but it'll be the only one I promise here. The line that I said was, look, I'm not anti-nuclear, but I am anti-bullshit. And what's coloured the debate on nuclear here in Australia at the moment, through politics, has been a highly inaccurate and disingenuous representation of the facts on how long it would take and how much it would cost to implement nuclear here in Australia. I'm not against it. All of our current decarbonisation pathways for us as a nation get us to around 80% decarbonised. What is a viable technology for that last 20% of decarbonisation in the grid? There isn't an answer out there at the moment. No policies are out there for it. Nuclear is a viable alternative for that last 20% of decarbonisation on the grid. It will be expensive, but it will also do the job. What nuclear is not is an immediate alternative today for going hard at renewables. Renewables are cheaper. They're reliable enough for us at the moment, especially when we factor in storage, and they're doable now. Amongst the uncomfortable truths are our coal-fired generation fleet will be almost entirely gone by 2035, which is 11 years from where we're standing at the moment. Global benchmarks for establishing a new nuclear industry in any country say it takes between 15 and 20 years to establish one nuclear reactor. Our current alternative leaders are out there saying that they can commission 2 nuclear reactors by 2037 from where we are now. So call that 13 years generously from where we are now. 2 nuclear reactors. If we as a nation were able to go from 0, where we are now, to commissioning 2 reactors equal in size to the biggest in the world, we would get out of those 2 reactors about 6 gigawatts of electricity generation capacity. By 2035, 2 years before, when they're saying they would be commissioned, by 2035, we will have had 18 gigawatts of coal retire from the grid. So the most ambitious nuclear plans that you could imagine get us a third of the way there, 2 years too late. Don't even give an answer for the other 2/3 of the problem. So again, nuclear is not bad, nuclear is not evil. I'm not against it. My university doesn't have a policy either way on this, but people out there who are saying that nuclear is cheap and that nuclear can be done quickly are lying. And I suppose I'll leave it at that and ask for questions. There's a slide there with all the dollars. You can have a look at it at your leisure.